Hi, we're a little bit past this by now because they're already talking about sending out the night police to do targeted roundups. That's right, night police to go do targeted roundups. They're going to be targeted roundups. They're not going to go out and round up millions and millions of people all the time. They may get up to millions and millions of people, but they're not going to do it right away, apparently, according to some of the folks that used to be in the White House before Joe Biden took over and drove out Trump. Now, the guy who was there, it looks like they might be bringing him back, and he's telling us they're going to do targeted roundups. And they tried, that's been done before. Targeted roundups were done in World War II and in a lot of war situations. They go and round folks up. Like the Turks did a targeted roundup. They didn't round up all the Turks. They went and rounded up all the Armenians. You see, that's targeting. In Germany, they didn't go round up all the French people and all the Portuguese people. No, they just went around and they targeted it. They just rounded up all the Jewish French people and the Jewish Portuguese people, et cetera, so forth. I think you're getting my point right now, right? So who are they going to target? They're targeting illegal immigrants. And they may be saying, oh, we're just going to go after the guys that are here and they're gang members and we're going to go find them and arrest them. But really, they don't know where they are. But they know where everybody else is. And once they start rounding them up, they're not going to have to tell you. They're not going to tell you what they're doing with the people. So we need to watch out for this. So what I'm going to talk about right now is a little out of date already, even though it just happened a few days ago. But what happened is a good example of what's coming with the night police. This happened during the day in Democratic state by a Democratic administration. But now we're seeing the Republicans going to the White House. And at this point, you're not seeing political parties anymore. You're seeing folks that do targeted roundups of human beings on lists that they make up for themselves to give themselves advantage. We're not talking about American parties anymore. We're talking about something quite different. But let's take a look what happened a few days ago. I'm going to talk about this. Fred the Raccoon was recently killed following a raid at his home of his human friends, right? So this could have been a human person. It could have been a legal immigrant at the home of his illegal immigrant friends. Okay, so we'll go with that. I'm not going to return to that. So Fred the Raccoon, he was recently killed following a raid at the home of his human friends, and he was seized at the home and transported to a facility where he was later killed after a number of forms were filled out and signed, and it was purportedly all very civilized. Now, not much has been said about Fred, who was the raccoon. At the time Fred was seized, his dear friend Peanut, and we have all heard about Peanut, I'm sure, Peanut the squirrel. Now, like Fred, Peanut was also locked up, transported against his will, placed in solitary confinement, and then killed after a number of forms were signed. Peanut was a squirrel. He was famous throughout the United States, and his fame was spreading around the world. It's no fault of Peanut the squirrel that Fred the Raccoon was not so well known. It's not Peanut's fault. Now, Fred's career had just started. He had just gotten into this work. And he was averse initially to the attention and bright lights of stardom. He was low-key, ate fruit and bugs, and would consult with his human friends before going out to look for crayfish. That's what raccoons do, okay? Now, little known is the fact that Fred the squirrel is Fred the raccoon is a direct descendant of Rascal. Rascal was an internationally famous raccoon in his own right, and he came to light for millions of children and adults around the world in the pages of a book written by his own human friend, the internationally famous author Sterling North. Oh, it's a great book. If you're a kid, read the book. If you're not a kid, give the book to a kid. In an almost opposite set of circumstances, Fred and Rascal spent out their lives. Rascal preferred the verge between the wild and what is called civilization, and ultimately choosing the wild. Fred, for all his intents and purposes, liked living in a 21st century human dwelling. He was starting to get out on his own, but his personal preferences were never fully realized as he was taken from his home, and his life was then taken from him by heavily armed New York State authorities. Game wardens and state troopers in New York State are armed with Glock 21, Generation 4, 45 caliber, ACP, semi-automatic pistols. Game wardens may be, if they request it, also be issued a second handgun. So they got what the state troopers have, the wardens have. So they may be, if they request it, be issued a second handgun, which they're allowed to conceal along with a 30-08 rifle. They would also likely have a 12-gauge shotgun with them when they're doing their work. And the squirrel and raccoon were unarmed. during their arrest, by the way. Now, Fred kept to himself, Fred the raccoon. Growing up in the semi-wilderness that is upstate New York, he lived a good life. Food was somewhat plentiful, though there were large swaths of space that had literally been destroyed by real estate development, and so he and his family became acquainted with settled areas inhabited by humans. His ancestor Rascal had lived a wild life in the forests of Wisconsin. Rascal started life with a family, but was separated shortly after birth when a lynx, Lynx, that's a wild cat, it's like a big bobcat, scared off his family. I'll let you read the rest of the book by yourself. If the agents and armed personnel that had raided Fred's house had read that story, and if the scientists that declared Fred a danger, actually understood science, and if the politicians who decide where to spend money for the good of the people had read the story, perhaps Fred's life might not have ended in tragedy. What has changed in our nation that a squirrel and a raccoon are seen as threats, and what has changed in our nation where we see our neighbors as a threat. What has made it possible for a posse to be formed, to surround, isolate, enter, and take over the home of law-abiding citizens in order to seize and kill family pets? These are pets. This is not even human beings yet. And these guys came in the day, not in the night. There are millions of people in the United States that have no contact with life outside their cities. They're isolated. They're living in a false environment that, according to the grocery industry, would shatter and fall apart in just 3 weeks if food deliveries failed, if they were stopped, if the supply chain was stopped. And remember, during COVID-19, it was interrupted. Keep in mind, we're not done yet. Keep in mind, the national grocery industry itself, when President Trump was in office, confirmed that they keep only 3 weeks of food in their supply chains. Remember when President Trump said that they told him that, and they asked him to ask people to stop buying stuff, to ask Americans to stop buying stuff? 3 weeks. Now, if anything interrupts that hunger, if anything interrupts that supply chain of 3 weeks, hunger and starvation are real dangers. That's why he got on TV to say that. The reason I bring this up is that out of those millions of people dependent on this unseen system, and they don't see it, they're generally not even aware of. Very few of those folks would be able to identify a raccoon, which is a natural neighbor. To give you an idea of how nature is viewed in the capital of New York, the world, capital of the world, New York City, squirrels like Peanut the squirrel are referred often to as tree rats, right? And raccoons are essentially absent in most American cities, but are found in the suburbs. When identified, then, they're sometimes trapped and moved, but more often an exterminator is called in to kill them. They don't want them there. They want to kill them. Got to kill them. Raccoons feed on a wide variety of creatures and plants. They eat, as we heard earlier, fish, crayfish. They also eat clams, oysters, mussels, fruit, nuts, insects, and small animals like mice. Ooh, they eat vermin. They are omnivores like humans. They eat what is available when it is available during that particular season. Raccoons are not dependent on a 3-week supply of food controlled by extremely rich people who haven't had to supply their own food for themselves or their families for generations. Those people actually live off the false idea, which is a different false idea, that they have created. And that is that the United States has a secure and uninterrupted supply of food, even at the same time that they are cognizant and totally aware that it's only 3 weeks worth. They take their share every day. Americans used to respect the natural world, and at this time, probably less than half the human population in the United States has even seen the natural world. Most people don't even see stars anymore in the sky. Of the remaining, their experience in the natural world may be an occasional vacation or to some country place they own, where they immediately busy themselves cutting down trees, planting grass, and complaining about the animals that they are witlessly trying to displace and replace. Others are aware of the natural places and the creatures which inhabit them, but are unconcerned because of another fable that Americans have believed for a long time, and that is that the natural world is so large and so wild that it will always be there. We will always be able to conquer it. We will always be able to expand into it, and that's just not the case. Take a look at any of the maps. Look at a map and see how much is left. Where a squirrel like Peanut was once able to go from the beaches of eastern North Carolina to the shores of the Mississippi River through the canopy of trees, never once touching the ground, the great eastern forest has literally, practically been completely destroyed. That simple and glaring fact seems to have been missed by the majority of Americans whose own ancestors, who were contemporaries of Rascal the raccoon, should know and be acquainted with. Understanding this, then, is not a great leap. It's not a great leap to understand the confusion and ire that comes from people in countries like Brazil and from West Africa, when well-meaning environmentalists tell them, don't destroy your forests. And that's good. I tell them, don't destroy your forests, because you're going to end up like this. If we look at Canada and what's become of their northwestern territories in just the past 40 years, 40, that's 10, 20, 30, 40, the past 40 years in Canada, Northwest, you can see a problem that is so large it might be forgivable if environmentalists missed it on the ground, but you can't miss it from the sky. You're talking about nearly 25 to 35% of the entire nation of Canada has been denuded of forests, and they put fields out there that grow wheat. Okay. Forgiveness for the current state of affairs regarding nature and our natural world and even our food supplies is not currently a viable option to offer. That's because those who are responsible for these incredibly dangerous situations in the current threatening state of affairs are themselves unable to comprehend what their immediate ancestors have done, what they themselves have been taught, and most importantly, what they themselves are doing right now in their lives. It's pretty kooky. And remember, we're talking about squirrels and raccoons here. Just one squirrel, just one raccoon. Some people have decried the fact that the raid on the home, which ended with the seizure and killing of Peanut the squirrel and Fred the raccoon, took 5 hours. Actually, it took much longer than that. It involved choices and options and decisions and money and weapons and vehicles and warrants and judges and lawyers and officers and agents and guns and violent intent and preparation that cost a lot more than the 5 hours it took to actually go over and violate the sanctity of an American home to kill a squirrel and a raccoon. And all of those things are beginning right now. They're beginning right now. The night police. Okay, let's go on with the squirrel and the raccoon. At this very moment, the state of New York is secretly shipping 20 trucks a day filled with radioactive check this out. 20 trucks a day filled with radioactive toxic nuclear waste to a Republic Services landfill located along the Huon River in the Charter Township of Van Buren. Now, this is going to change a little bit. I'm giving you a little more information about another incident involving the state of New York. It's all going to tie together, so stick with me here because this is pretty serious stuff, right? 20 trucks a day of toxic nuclear waste going from New York to Michigan. The material originated in Hanford, Washington. What? That's in Washington. They brought it to New York, and now they're bringing it to Michigan. Along the Columbia River. It was created by the work that went into building the bomb that destroyed Nagasaki. That's right. This is toxic waste from the work that went into building the Nagasaki bomb. It's been stored along the shores of Niagara River for like the last 80 years. At the same time, because of that arrogant circumstance by Governor Hochul, that put in place, Governor DeWine of Ohio is copying her work and is sending along their radioactive toxic nuclear waste that was used to build the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima, right? From along the Cuyahoga River to the same garbage dump in Michigan. Check this out. Keep in mind that the materials used to build each bomb separately, and they were built far, far away from one another, should never, ever be brought together, as they're reactive to one another, even in the smallest of trace doses. Now, if anyone tries to stop that, if we go over there with signs and start, don't bring it in here, don't stop the truck and everything, right? If someone tries to do that and physically take the steps to stop that from happening, they'll be met with heavily armed agents who will force the matter. And just as illogic and nonsense led to the assault on a private American home where heavily armed agents seized a squirrel and a raccoon, we are seeing a miscarriage of justice that is on the face a farce, but it's in its form is a horrible corruption. It is a cruelty, an oppression of the worst kind. And we're not even talking about the night police rounding up, making selected arrests amongst a population of millions. that these folks want to eject. Okay, all right. We're going back to the raccoon and the. We're almost done here. We're going right back to the raccoon and the squirrel. Now there is a sorrow in the home and in the hearts of the family who cared for and loved Peanut the squirrel and Fred the raccoon. Just as there is sadness in the hearts and minds of millions of people who had become acquainted with them. And many millions of those people are going to be, if the United States carries out this process, if they're allowed to do that, if this strange group is allowed to do that, these nationalist socialists are allowed to do that, they're going to round up selected human beings. Already in the state of Michigan, where raccoons and squirrels still have some small place in the world where they live, there are people moving materials that cause cancer, birth defects, other illnesses, and they're bringing them into a heavily populated area that's filled with schools, universities, colleges, churches, laboratories, libraries, and all the monetary power and intelligence that an advanced society could have and develop. This is a cool place. And they're doing this sort of thing. And they're getting away with it. And they plan on night police making select arrests of individuals who will be taken to some undisclosed locations and meet some undisclosed fate. Because if you think they're sending them home with some suitcases and a brand new car and a job and an opportunity that they missed when they left their horrible homes in Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Colombia, Chile, Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, Panama, then you haven't been informed properly, and I'm trying to help you with that. It's being brought there, okay? That nuclear waste is being brought there by people who think nothing of using money and guns to get what they want and impose their will on others. So we've lost Peanut the squirrel and Fred the raccoon. And now we're facing a situation where the people who think that they can openly defy logic and law and nature and God's intent, they think that they can go out there and targetly arrest and seize and drag from homes and place in prison and place in vehicles, armed vehicles, and carry them away from us. Is that what you want? Is that your dream? Is that what you voted for?